Here we go. From our studios this week in Los Angeles and Tampa, this is Green Tagged Theme Park in 30. I'm Philip from Gantom Lighting and Controls, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Scott Swenson of Scott Swenson Creative Development. On Green Tag, we look at the top news each week, and we explain why it matters to business professionals. This week, of course, we're going to get really in the weeds on these Six Flags earnings, looking at the Q4 earnings from last year and everything.
Six Flags? We never talk about Six Flags on this show.
I know it's very unusual for us to talk about Six Flags on this show, but we're going to do it this week. So, and you know, there's a lot here. I'm not sure we're going to get to all of it. I don't know. I have a lot of notes about this. I went through everything, but to me, I think to me, the biggest story is really, the biggest lens is really just that looking at the new CEO, he's only been here for 2 months, right? And he's really give pretty candid earnings call, and looking at everything he said and his suggestions, I can't help but think that they're in this position because they have had a history of making centralized bad decisions, and that it's like it comes from the top down where they cut stuff or they just don't listen to the operators or to anybody really. So you're kind of like, that was sort of my takeaway. I think the biggest example that we'll talk about is the seasonal events that they said were a big mistake to cut, even though Scott and I said it was obvious that they shouldn't have cut them because anyone who knows anything about Christmas knows that it's your biggest moneymaker. So anyway, I'm just, to put the context for everybody, I think that's what's going on. It's really weird to me where a lot of the stuff he's saying is like, these are so obviously bad decisions, right? And he's presenting it to us like a story, which is like, here are all these examples of things we're going to do to increase operations. And aren't these just great ideas? You're like, yes, those are really good ideas. But wait a minute. How did you get in a position where you were ignoring these ideas in the first place? So, I don't know. Maybe that's just a skeptic in me. I don't know, Scott.
Well, I think you also have to recognize that when you step into a position like this, you know, everybody talks about that honeymoon period. It's not honeymoon
that's right.
period. It's you have to become trusted.
Yeah.
By the organization. And so you're not going to come in and go, God, you guys have made the most dumbass decisions on the planet. That's not a way to ingratiate yourself to your coworkers. So it makes sense to me, especially, to be honest, having worked with John Riley. It makes sense to me that his position is, and here's what we're going to do. It does not surprise me that he has let things go to the point where he can come in and be the savior, or his ideas, or these ideas, whether they're his or not, can come in and be the savior ideas.
That's interesting. That's because I think that's basically where we are.
Because you have to ingratiate yourself to your team. That's the first thing you have to do when you come in at that level. That's what come in and be a total dick.
That's 100% what he is. He's literally doing that right now. That's 100% what he's doing. You know, he before the earnings call, he's been traveling to 14 parks, and he's been talking to all the frontline people, and he's been like soliciting all of the ideas directly from frontline operators. He says he has over 300 ideas that could be actionable, and he spent a lot of the call talking about specific examples, which is all good. But again, I think it's writ large is a little bit of a distraction. But anyway, what he said here, his two big quotes are, the underlying demand is there, and the biggest value creation opportunity is through better execution. Does that sound familiar, Scott?
Sounds completely familiar. And it's
Isn't that what we've been saying literally for 5-6 years?
But again, you know, I learned quite a bit while working with John. So I'm glad to hear him say that, because it reinforces what I learned from his actions when he was at Bush.
Yep. So I'm going to go through the numbers here to give everybody, I don't know, maybe I'm not going to go through all the numbers. I mean, I'm sure everybody knows, everybody listening to this, watch this already know, but you know, basically all the numbers are down. There's not a good number really anywhere, actually. Like revenue is down, attendance is down, per cap spending is up a little bit, up 8%, but that's kind of qualified, right? Because prices also got raised in some areas. So that's a little bit of a interesting thing. Adjusted EBITDA is down. Operating days are down. They blame weather again, although weather only caused 15 closed days. The rest of the elimination was due to cutting winter holiday events. I don't know. To me, the most important numbers are these. Okay, per cap spending 61.90, modified EBITDA margin 27.1, down from 33.2. Okay, I think those two numbers, maybe also the operating days, those are the really ones. That per cap is really low. That's a low. That's very low per cap. And then you got on the 27% margin, he was literally called out by it from the Arpine. Her name is Arpine, and she's from the UBS analyst. And she said, basically, do you feel like you have a good handle on capturing that margin? Like, what are you going to do about this margin problem? And he said, 27% gives us a mandate. The work is underway. We believe there is considerable opportunity over time. Okay. And just to clarify, so there was increase in per cap. They say that it is driven by a higher guest spending on food and beverage, merchandise, and extra charged products during the quarter, which of course is something they're investing in later, investing more in food and all that. They've been talking about all this stuff for a while. So it seems like those things are working, which could be what he's referring to. The only other thing here to mention
let me just clarify here. How do they break out per cap? Is it per cap including admission? Because I see a separate line item for admission per cap.
Yep, it's total per cap. That's right. Yeah.
So that's total per cap, but then they break out admissions per cap.
Yep.
So
admissions per cap is at 33.41. That's right. And then in park, 28.49. Yep. Which is still low. Yeah. Admissions per cap being $33 is it's crazy.
Well, but again, I can't. I'm looking at this in a vacuum right now because I don't know what the other per caps are. The other admissions per caps are.
That's a really good point. I'm sure some of our listeners can find that data, and if you do, please put it in the comments. From what I could find, it's really not disclosed in this way. So clearly like that. Although, of course, the line from Disney and from Universal has been that per cap spending is up and admissions are up and all this stuff is up. So, but I'm just going based off of if you're multiplying this stuff, attendance like 47.4 million times 61.90, you're getting pretty close to the net revenue. And the rest of that revenue is made up in sponsorships and in in those kind of licensing deals and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how they're getting to their net revenue. But so one other thing to note here is the goodwill impairment. Okay, so so basically when the merger closed in 2024, the combined company recorded all the intangible value, like the brand, the customer relationships, future earnings potential, all that kind of stuff as a goodwill on the balance sheet. And basically that is required to be annually tested against actual performance. So in 2024, the impairment was 42 million. And then now in 2025, it grew to 1.51 billion, which is basically the accounting system formally saying that the merger has failed to create a lot of the value that they had proposed it was going to create. So there's that little marker in there, is that we have kind of a real number indicator of how much it is not going according to plan so far. So I guess there's that. So when it comes to his philosophy, like we mentioned, better execution, all that kind of stuff. I mentioned be going and touring the parks and doing all those proposals and all that kind of stuff. So I thought the examples were very interesting. And again, I think all the examples he was saying were so good that's why it's almost suspicious. I don't, maybe that's just me, but he's like, we're going to increase the uptime at Magic Mountain and other parks. We have placed executive chefs in the parks, I guess park wide, to elevate food quality and improve guest satisfaction, also leading to, as he mentioned earlier, increased spending in per cap. He talked about specific examples like his visit to Carowinds and to check on how they were sourcing better quality food and how they were being more efficient with their time. He says he visited Kings Island to learn ideas on maintenance, on how to keep the rides operating and trying to roll out all that kind of better stuff. And then He gave even better examples. He says at Magic Mountain, they were renting air compressors for $32,000 a year, but they could buy one for $35,000, and then they could, amortize it over time. Same at Knott's, they could spend $14,000 to buy a forklift, and it costs $19,000 a year to rent it, so they could save $4,000 right there on just one forklift. And then he mentioned automation, and supposedly all these ideas came from people working directly in operations that he solicited through their new feedback system in order, that. He described a new feedback system of having people submit stuff, and then it would go to sort of a little vetting process, and then it could come up to their team, and they can look at then rolling them out. To me, he mentioned that it's not systemic. Like he said that the issues are not systemic; the issues are market by market, park by park. I sort of disagree because if you writ large, to me, there's a pattern emerging, which is just that there's not a clear operating principle that is shared by the parks. And again, bad decisions, bad centralized communication, which has led to, I would say, more systemic problems. But I don't know. Scott's making a face. You totally disagree?
Well, that's because both companies prior to the merger
had different SOPs.
Had completely different SOPs.
And they just never.
They both had communications issues within the parks.
Yep.
They also both have parks spread out over really more markets than any other American theme park operator. So yeah, I think this makes total sense that it's not a systemic issue, that it's a park by park issue. Because there is a systemic issue, and that is poor communication, which obviously doing his tour from park to park to park to park is you can either call it a gimmick or it's a way to show, no, we're now one family, so I need to go out and see all the relatives.
Yep. That's right.
So I think it makes, if he had said it's a systemic problem, I would have questioned that significantly more than him saying it's market by market or park by park, because they have more parks than anybody else.
That's true.
Six Flags has more parks in more markets than any other theme park operator in the U.S. I'd probably second, and again, I'm guessing here, but I would guess that Herschend is probably second or something like that, especially now that Palace is there. But so I don't know that. Just to kind of go back, I did do a little bit of comparison here as far as per caps go, and it is broken down. They say they do three basic categories. They say premium destination parks, which are top tier parks like Dollywood, Hershey, reported higher guest spending in 2025, with some exceeding an $80 per cap.
Yep.
Okay. Major parks like Disney and Universal, top tier destination parks were reported to be above 120 per cap for 2025.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean much to me at all, because just to get into Disney is 130. So how it can only be 120, I don't quite understand. But
because exactly. Then you have parking. I mean, I can tell you, you're right. That's just for one day. That's not even park hopper. And then you have parking. So it's crazy. But
so that seems low considering what their prices are. And then for regional parks like Six Flags, Cedar Fair, it says per cap spending, and like you just reported. So it says, well, regional park like Six Flags, spending increased by 8% due to higher prices in 2025. Overall leisure spending faces pressure with projected growth of only 1% to 2% through the year.
That's right. It's also, so that's good context for how their per cap is lagging a little bit in some markets. That I think that's also the other asterisk on it, is, as you brought up, some of them are competing with Disney and some of them are not, and so some of them are depending on the market too. So in that way, I think Six Flags is very broad to apply the $60 rule to the entire chain, because it kind of gets a little wonky in some markets. But there's also, of course, the demand, overall demand, looking at that. And then another note also that was stripped out later in the call is basically looking at if you accounted for the weather and also for the seasonal closure due to the events that they canceled, if you kind of like stripped all that out and kind of tried to make a comparison, their attendance would still be down roughly 2% daily. So attendance, like writ large, like if you toss all those things out, which again, how much you can really toss them out with just numbers is, because as you and I know, like so much of a person's decision to visit is influenced by the seasonal events. And so you kind of got to like, how much could you really toss that out entirely? But they tried to and give a 2% decline daily number, basically. So their attendance is still down even if you get, but anyway, I mentioned the seasonal events were the biggest example of my whole hypothesis here, that it's about better execution. And on the seasonal events, they got grilled on them, but they also copped up to it. I mean, it's as much as a admission of not doing it as I think you ever get on earning calls. But he said, in hindsight, the decision, meaning the decision to cut all the seasonal events, did not optimize profits at every park the way we needed it to. Those events can be meaningful demand drivers, and removing them created a self-inflicted headwind in terms of both attendance and operating leverage. We will rethink the winter holiday strategy with a tighter, returns-driven approach, market by market, rather than applying a broad brush. We will approach seasonal programming with market-specific rigor, clear ROI thresholds, and tested scale methodology. And a lot of that is a word salad, and I'm not quite sure if it's true. I mean, in that, like, it wasn't. I didn't really see it as a broad brush, because some places brought back Christmas and some did not, and so it wasn't really like he cut it chain wide. But anyway, just as a reminder, they cut Winterfest at California's Great America. They cut Winterfest at Kings Dominion. They cut Holiday in the Park at Great Adventure and Six Flags Over Georgia. And then they also reduced their spending at some of the other parks as well. So they anticipate that the seasonal event coverage led to a loss of approximately 425,000 visitors. So in other news, Scott was right. when we had a whole episode on them cutting it, and I don't remember exactly what you said, Scott. If this were a higher budget show, I would play the little thing where we would hear you talk about it, but I'm pretty sure that you said something to the effect of it's not a good sign if they can't make Christmas work, because Christmas is like the best selling event.
Christmas makes money. Christmas makes money. Christmas makes money. Halloween makes money, and it is a bad sign when you are cutting your money makers because they cost too much.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, this is nothing new. This has been going on in theme parks for 30 years, at least, that I know. To me,
that's the funny part. That's exactly right. That's the funny part, because that's what I hear, because this is what you've been in for your career. And this is what I report on. And you hear this constantly from everywhere.
It makes no sense when you have a guaranteed traditional return visitation with a Christmas event, and you're looking only at the spreadsheets, and you see, oh, we spent how much on that, and we only make this much back. We only have a 20% profit margin. Oh my God, we got to cut that. Okay, if that's your core product and you only have a 20%, yes. But if you're doing it seasonally, that doesn't make any sense.
That's right.
That does not make any sense at all. That you're literally, unless you have a plan to replace that, this is the thing that boggles my mind. They'll say, well, let's cut Christmas and it'll save us X amount of dollars. Great. Where are we going to make up the lost visitation and the lost spend that we're not going to get by not doing Christmas the rest of the year? Where are we going to make that up? What is the plan to do that? You cannot cut a seasonal event and think that, well, it's just going to save us that money because we won't spend. Those guests won't come.
That's right.
Those guests who are dedicated to that seasonal event won't come. Yeah. So, it makes far more sense to me to get lean and mean with the seasonal events and think of them more as a package deal that your park puts on. Again, anybody who's known me has heard me quote Mark Rose with SeaWorld Parks and Entertainment and I say SeaWorld Parks and Entertainment because that's what it was called when he was there, for him to make the statement, we need to think of our seasonal attractions as the same way we think of any other element of the park. It's just this only happens to be open 18 or 25 days a year, so it's one of those situations where you can't. It's sort of like saying, gosh, we have to save money, let's close a roller coaster.
Yeah. That's right. It's like saying, why don't we close it? Because then we can save money on the staff. We don't have to have the staff operate it.
Correct. Correct.
And we don't have to do training. And then all that training we can save.
And you get hit with the amortization that nobody thinks about, where all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is closed. That means we have to take everything in our books this year, right now, when it hits. So again,
that's so funny, because I can't imagine that, especially in light of the insurance conversation we had last week. Can you imagine someone in the boardroom being like, you know what, if we just close the roller coasters, we could get a cheaper insurance and we could skip on training because we wouldn't have to train all these people for the new insurance requirements, and we wouldn't have to staff it. We'd save so much money. All the roller coasters do is cost us money. I can see someone making that argument.
And you know where it really happens? Parks that have live animals. Mm-hmm. Live animals, you have to care for whether the park's open or not. Yeah. So on the books, it looks catastrophic. It's like, oh dear God, what are we doing? But I think we've seen what's happened when you can trim a tree to the point where it dies. So stop pruning before the tree looks ugly is what it really boils down to, and find a more efficient way to fertilize, because the cutting, you cannot save your way into profit. You can't cut your way into profit, because the more you cut, the less people have to experience and the less likely they are to either show up to your park or return to your park. So you have to take that into balance. I've used the term double bottom line for years, and that is, you have to look at, I'm not saying be irresponsible when it comes to money. What I'm saying is, look at the bang for your buck. Look at, if we invest in a Christmas event, we are guaranteed this number of people because we know people have made it a tradition in our park. And if we cut that, then that visitation is going to go away. Oh no, they'll just come to the park anyway.
No, they won't.
But they won't.
Clearly they won't. I feel, here's the funny part, Scott. Clearly they won't. Look, literally right here, 425,000 less visitors. Mm-hmm. Clearly they won't. Mm-hmm. How much you want to bet this year some other park somewhere is going to do the same, is going to have the same conversation? Well, it's so
happened every year for the last 30 years. I don't know why it should change now.
And I think you're right about it's. You're right. The thing to emphasize in what you said is that if you have a core product, that's the big thing. You have a core product, you add this as a reason. People need a reason to return. I mean, I know, but that's the key thing. So it might be different if you don't have a core product. I mean, it could be different in that space, or adding, if the event is a core product, that's a little different. Then you can look at different. But when you're an attraction that has a core product, you need to give people a reason to return.
Well, and you really, I would say, if you're going to make that argument, if for the boardroom that is, or the C-suite that's going to make the argument of, let's get rid of our seasonal events and save all that money, quote unquote, save all that money, I would say flip the whole thing on its ear and say, what if we only did seasonal events?
Yeah. What
if we didn't have a core product?
Yeah.
And we only have seasonal events, and then you have, Netflix House.
That's right.
So,
or Boulevard, right? Boulevard World, Boulevard City, all those places that are
Boulevard, yes, Boulevard City in Riyadh, events. Absolutely, yeah. So people forget the side value of seasonal events. They forget that it, first of all, makes your season passes significantly more valuable to your guests. They forget that it gives people a reason. It lights a fuse for them. We have to go now if we want to see this. Right. And I think you're seeing that. I think you're seeing that in California with Disney and Universal when they do their the Fan Fest nights, for example.
Yep.
You got to go at that point in time. You may not have planned to go back to the parks for 2 years, but then all of a sudden you find out, oh, they're doing Squid Games, or they're doing whatever. They're doing a One Piece installation that's going to be amazing.
Yeah, they are doing a new One Piece show, yeah, or the Monsters, Universal Monsters Scooby Doo Adventure. Yeah, if you're fans of any of those things, you're like, I got to buy a ticket, and it's not just
I
buy
would
a
love
ticket.
I would love to see the Scooby Doo Classic Monsters mashup. I think that would be hysterically fun.
Yep,
that hits two very important brands for me.
Yeah. See, I again. Well, we talked about it a lot, but the parks always keep coming back to this whole cycle about cutting it and whatnot. And clearly it doesn't work. And here's the earnings. But the other thing too is the seasonal events. What also helps with them is the good food and beverage and good merch, which we talk about ad nauseum on here, which at least they are mentioning that because they're mentioning the renovations and they're mentioning having a chef at each park or trying to get a chef at each park, right? Which also is good because you need someone to be able to. He is right about that. Location by location, it does change, right? The Knott's Boysenberry Festival is an example. You're not going to do that at a different place. So having the localized chef that know the ingredients and know the sourcing and know the kitchen makeup and the capacities of the staff to be able to preserve food waste and all that is critical. So at least that's in there, and you're hoping then it's going to be extended. Like I'm hoping the other shoe is going to drop, and he's going to say, "Oh, that means we also should make robust seasonal menus for our seasonal events."
Well, and where I'm hoping it goes is if he recognizes the value of seasonal events, then he starts looking at seasonal events that perhaps are culinary based. So that in Chicago you do a beer and brats fest, or a pizza fest or whatever. And then at Knott's, you do the Boysenberry Fest because that's so tied into the DNA of that brand.
Yeah. Well, I think it could be for Knott's, for Boysenberry, they are doing a tasting card type of program, so it is a full thing this year, and I'm hoping that they look at that and then can roll it out at other places. While he's doing his listening tour and they're kind of taking a new opportunity to look at feedback. Hopefully, you can see the success of those things and roll it out to other places.
And I just want to point out one other really strong benefit to this approach, and that is a unification of the teams. Because, one of the biggest challenges I think he's coming into is he has two companies that were competitors that are now fused together. And on the front line, they had no say in it. So now all of a sudden they have to operate in the way of the new Six Flags or the current Six Flags, whether they were Six Flags Legacy or Knott's, or Cedar Fair. But by doing this, it creates a sense of ownership. And by going out and saying, tell me, opening up an actual program that's bringing in 300 new suggestions that are being investigated company-wide, this is huge. Yeah. So even if 5 of these things come to fruition, going through the actions of going out and saying, what do I need to know? What do I, as new CEO, need to know about your part of this park? And by getting that kind of feedback, it creates a sense of ownership and a sense of loyalty for the employees.
Yep.
Especially when they see that it's being evaluated, looked into, and if it gets rolled out in their park and maybe 2 others, oh my gosh, all of a sudden that was my idea.
Yeah.
It is so smart to bring people together. And I'm assuming that, the employees have the same document that I signed when I worked for Busch. And that was anything I create while I work here is owned by Busch Gardens.
Mm-hmm.
I signed that. I knew it going in. But just being able to be heard, I think, is something that will benefit the overall ecosystem of these parks and of the corporation in a way that I don't know whether anybody's really looking at, certainly not in an earnings call, because you can't put a dollar sign on loyalty. But I think it is a great sort of, as one of my coworkers used to say, it's a great kumbaya moment. It's a great moment of let's all come together as a new company.
Yep. Before we finish, we're almost out of time. A few things I want to mention. Everyone who commented before about how confusing the new pass perks and all that system is, he mentioned that in the earnings call. He did talk about how it was a little confusing on those. He said In some cases, there were confusion about benefits on passes. In some cases, they were paying more for a pass that they felt they had paid in the past. That was funny. On Enchanted Parks, he was asked directly about the Enchanted Parks holdings, which we talked about on a previous episode, in which he said, quote, "We don't have anything to share today on that front," end quote, which is not a denial. It's actually just a no comment type of thing. So, I mean, he didn't deny it. So we'll just say it that way. And then still, as a reminder to everybody, he did mention the portfolio reorganization. We didn't spend too much time talking about it because that wasn't the focus of this show. And we've talked about it before. But I don't see any way in which they're not going to still sell parks. He didn't mention anything negative. He instead took, like Scott said, the positive approach. He's like, Mexico has great opportunities and this and that. So basically, you could just go through and say who he didn't talk about. And those are probably the candidates. And there were some people, some of the analysts did try and corner him by basically saying that there are a few parks that are generating less than 5% of EBITDA combined. What's he going to do? And he kind of didn't give an answer. He just was like, oh, word salad. So, but I feel like it's pretty clear where it's like, if he didn't talk about them, and then if they're in those parks, they're not making up any money and doing anything, they're probably on the chopping block. And the thing is, they need to be, because they have too much debt.
Right. Well, and they're either on the chopping block or they know they have to either put up or shut up. In other words, they've got to do a rapid turnaround to not be on the chopping block. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think part of it is, I would doubt at the moment that all the parks he didn't mention are going to be cut, are going to be sold. I would doubt that. I do think, though, that all the parks, as you said, the parks he didn't mention or the parks that are underperforming need to be looked at. They need to be evaluated. But that's true of any good business.
Yep. Yeah.
If you run a restaurant and your spinach espresso doesn't make any money, you got to cut it from the menu.
Yeah.
So, and if you have spinach espresso, bleh, what are you thinking? Anyway, we've gone over on time. This is Six Flags Theme Park in 30. I'm sorry, Green Tag Theme Park in 30. And on behalf of Philip Hernandez with Gantom Lighting and Control, and myself, Scott Swenson with Scott Swenson Creative Development, we hope to see you all next week. Thank you so much. Have a great week.